On the evening of August 27th, Major General John Pope receives new intelligence reports regarding Stonewall Jackson's strength and whereabouts from Joe Hooker's prisoners taken at Bristow during the Battle of Kettle Run. The Federal Army commander quickly announces his plans to bag the whole crowd of brazen Confederates the next day. He eagerly directs his entire Army of Virginia to converge on Manassas Junction from the southwest, west, and north. Although Pope's conception possesses admirable initiative and aggressiveness, it ignores two fundamental factors. First, the general's success depends upon the unlikely eventuality that Jackson will quietly remain at Manassas Junction until Pope's scattered divisions can descend upon him from three directions of the compass. Second, he ignores the existence of half of Lee's army, Major General James Longstreet's right wing, which Pope now knows to be on the march and in the vicinity of Salem. Major General Stonewall Jackson has no intention of keeping his left wing stationary at the plundered Union supply base at Manassas Junction. His strategic imperative depends upon bringing Pope to battle, but only under circumstances favorable to the Confederates. This means that General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia must be reunited, but Jackson's couriers inform him that Longstreet is at least a day's march away. Stonewall would have to purchase that time by adopting a strong position from which he can connect with Longstreet via Thoroughfare Gap, and if they then hope to attack Pope with advantage, Jackson has to discourage the Union Army commander from retreating across Bull Run to assume a defensive posture until Major General George B. McClellan joins him with the rest of the Army of the Potomac. General Jackson studies the maps of the area and discovers a location that satisfies his criteria perfectly: Stony Ridge, a low-rise 1,000 yards north of the Warrenton Turnpike near the old Manassas battlefield fought 13 months earlier, possesses all of Jackson's required virtues. Its heavy woods would conceal the Confederates but allow them a clear view of the highway that Pope might take across Bull Run. General Longstreet could link with Jackson there either via the Warrenton Turnpike or a secondary road leading directly from Thoroughfare Gap. Another byway connects Stony Ridge with Aldi Gap in the Bull Run Mountains, offering an escape route for Jackson if Longstreet somehow fails to arrive. Finally, the cuts and fills of an unfinished railroad running along the base of Stony Ridge form a ready-made entrenchment for Jackson's outnumbered divisions. This unfinished railroad cut had been intended to be an extension of the Manassas Gap Railroad to Alexandria that would have allowed traffic to avoid being transferred to the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. The war ended the plans. Instead, Jackson's Confederates would take advantage of the roadbed as a field fortification. One thoughtful Confederate considers Jackson's move to Stony Ridge a masterpiece of strategy unexcelled during the war. Jackson's division, commanded by Brigadier General William B. Talfer, begins the march to Stony Ridge at 9 p.m. on August 27th along the Manassas-Sully Road, reaching the Warrenton Turnpike intersection near the famous Stone House by midnight. Stonewall intends for Major Generals A.P. Hill and Ewell to follow Talfer's lead, but bewildered guides misdirect these troops across Bull Run, and in Hill's case all the way to Centreville. It would not be until the next morning that Jackson's entire left wing reunites on Stony Ridge. Behind them, Manassas Junction lies in charred ruins, a hall of prize for the first federal troops who appear there late on the morning of August 28th. In fact, nothing has gone just right for Pope this day. Major Generals McDowell and Sigel had become ensnared on the roadways around Gainesville and suffered a 5-hour delay in their march toward Manassas. Struggling through the tangled terrain, Sigel stumbles cross country towards Bristow, each step rendering his First Corps more irrelevant to the strategic situation. General McDowell finally pushes eastward on the turnpike at about 10 a.m. Brigadier General John F. Reynolds' Pennsylvania Reserves Division leads the 3rd Corps marching column, followed by the 4 brigades of Brigadier General Rufus King's 1st Division. McDowell places Brigadier General James B. Ricketts' 2nd Division in the rear with orders to peek over their shoulders toward Thoroughfare Gap, alert to the appearance of Confederates at that critical point. McDowell's precaution proves wise, as events would soon demonstrate. The 4 divisions of Longstreet's right wing who begin their march in Jackson's footsteps on the afternoon of August 26 cover a commendable 14 miles before sunset, but tramp only 6 miles on the 27th. General Lee, who travels with Longstreet, allows the pace to be equally languid on August 28th, a surprising concession considering Jackson's perilous situation on the plains of Manassas. By late morning, Longstreet's leading brigades approach the potential choke point at Thoroughfare Gap. McDowell first learns of Longstreet's proximity from one of his overworked cavalry regiments which had been attempting to block the constricted mountain pass with a jumble of felled trees. On his own initiative, McDowell turns Ricketts around and orders him to use his 5,000 men of the 2nd Division to plug the bottleneck at Thoroughfare Gap. Ricketts arrives in mid-afternoon and engages the Georgians of G.B. Anderson's brigade and Henry Benning's brigade for several bloody hours in what becomes known as the Battle of Thoroughfare Gap, or Battle of Chapman's Mill. Major General Longstreet finally settles the affair by wisely orchestrating a flanking movement on both sides of the gap, offering Ricketts no choice but to retire his outgunned brigades to the east. Longstreet then moves up and secures Thoroughfare Gap, leaving no natural impediment to his unification with Jackson the next day. Meanwhile, General Pope continues to indulge his fixation with Jackson. The Union commander has snatched a handful of Confederate stragglers at Manassas Junction, who misinform him that Stonewall has marched just a few hours earlier towards Centreville. Hill and Ewell had, in fact, mistakenly crossed Bull Run the previous night, but by midday on August 28th, they have rejoined Talfer along Stony Ridge. Pope accepts the prisoner's inaccurate intelligence at face value and redirects his army towards Centreville, determined to annihilate Jackson no matter where the wily Confederate might go. Stonewall Jackson shares Pope's enthusiasm for a fight. His tired but contented men, packed like herring in a barrel in the woods behind the old railroad, lounge in the August heat awaiting the word to spring on their unwary prey. That word arrives shortly before noon, when Reynolds appears on the Warrenton Turnpike at the head of McDowell's 3rd Corps marching column just west of Jackson's concealed right flank. General Jackson rises like an electric shock and orders Ewell and Talfer to move to the attack, but before they can deploy, their foe vanishes, disappearing down Pageland Lane, a country road that will take the Federals toward Manassas as their current orders demand. A frustrated Jackson prowls along his lines hoping for another opportunity to strike the Yankees, anxious to also learn about Longstreet's progress. Toward the evening, Stonewall receives good news on both fronts. A courier reports Longstreet's success at the Battle of Thoroughfare Gap, suggesting that Old Pete will connect with Jackson's right early the next day. Much relieved, Jackson seeks a few moments of rest, indulging in one of his impromptu naps in the comfort of a fence corner. He has not slept for long when breathless messengers pound up to him and announce the presence of a large marching column of bluecoats moving east on the Warrenton Turnpike across the Confederate front. Jackson mounts in an instant and rides off to see for himself. On the open slope of a pasture belonging to John Brawner's rented farm, northwest of the little hamlet of Groveton, Jackson parades in full view of the passing Federals. The Northerners take little notice of the lone rider whom they assume to be a mere cavalry scout. Jackson absorbs the scene for a few moments and then returns to his fence quarter headquarters. "Bring out your men, gentlemen," he tells his subordinates. Stonewall's Federal targets belong to Rufus King's 1st Division. King, the 40-year-old scion of a distinguished New York family, is McDowell's favorite division commander. Perhaps a warm relationship induces McDowell to overlook his subordinate's failing health. King had suffered an epileptic seizure on August 23rd and will experience a recurrence of his malady on the afternoon of the 28th, leaving him incapable of taking the field during this critical moment for his division. King's 1st Division of McDowell's 3rd Corps notably contains the 4th Brigade of all Westerners, the 2nd, 6th, and 7th Wisconsin, and 19th Indiana, under the command of Brigadier General John Gibbon, and 3 additional brigades of untested troops from New York and Pennsylvania. Though yet to see action in the war, Gibbon is an experienced regular Army officer, a veteran of the Mexican War and Seminole Indian Wars. He had also served as an artillery instructor at West Point and was the author of the Artillerist's Manual, a scientific treatise on gunnery used by both sides in the war. Gibbon was appointed Brigadier General of Volunteers in 1862 and given command of King's Western Brigade. Demanding the same level of discipline and professionalism from these volunteer Westerners that he demanded of his regular artillerymen, Gibbon quickly set about drilling his troops and improving their appearance, ordering them to wear white leggings and, rather than the standard Union kepi, black hardy hats, known as the Model 1858 dress hats. These tall hats are adorned with a plum, giving the brigade a distinctive appearance, and it soon becomes known logically enough as the Black Hat Brigade. Of Gibbon's 4 regiments, only one, the 2nd Wisconsin, had previously seen action in the war, 13 months earlier on this same ground. King is commanding his division from an ambulance after suffering his seizure from August 23rd. Now, as his mile-long column unknowingly nears the front of Jackson's entire left wing, with Brigadier General John P. Hatch's 1st Brigade in the lead, King suffers another mild seizure that renders him combat ineffective and leaves his division without a commander for the remainder of the evening. At 6 p.m. on Thursday, August 28, 1862, after Hatch's 1st Brigade marches through Groveton past the Brawner and Dogan's farm north of the Pike, his men approach a knoll east of the village and spot movement on the ridge to the north. With Hatch now in temporary command of the division, the Blue Column halts while the 14th Brooklyn is brought up to reconnoiter the woods and fields below the ridgeline. Finding nothing, they fall back to the Pike. As Hatch and the other brigade commanders, Gibbon and Brigadier Generals Abner Doubleday and Marcena R. Patrick scan the ridgeline with field glasses. A lone Confederate horse-drawn battery emerges from the trees and wheels into position. First Lieutenant Asher R. Garber's Staunton, Virginia artillery from Ewell's division promptly opens up on the Union column. The 3rd discharge finds the range and begins targeting Gibbon's Black Hat Brigade and the 2 brigades behind him, strung out along the Pike. These are the opening shots of the second battle Bull Run, or Battle of Second Manassas. As shells scream overhead and explode around them, some of the Union column quickly scatters, their ambulances and wagons careening panic-stricken off the road into the fields and forests south of the Pike. The New York regiments in Patrick's 3rd Brigade, now about 1,000 yards behind Gibbon, immediately breaks up and heads for the trees. They will not participate in the fight to come despite Gibbon's repeated pleas for help. It will be hours before Patrick can regain control of his troops, leaving Gibbon and Doubleday to contend with the Confederates by themselves. As Hatch has marched his lead brigade farther east along the turnpike, putting himself out of the fighting and almost out of range of Confederate cannons. With his black hats of the 4th Brigade posted on the road a quarter mile behind Hatch's, Gibbon rides to a knoll north of the Pike and watches as 2 additional Confederate batteries emerge from the tree line, unlimber and open fire on the broken Union column on the road below. Keeping his head like the veteran he is, Brigadier General Gibbon shouts for his old unit, Battery B, 4th U.S. Artillery, now commanded by Captain Joseph B. Campbell, to deploy on the small knoll east of the Brawner Farm. Soon, the ground trembles violently as Union and Confederate gunners exchange artillery fire. Within minutes, the Union regulars are getting the better of it, and the Southerners elect to pull their guns back to safety. Just as the guns fall back, Jackson sends in another battery, Captain William T. Pogue's Rockbridge, Virginia Artillery, on Gibbon's left, and it begins blasting case and saw shot at the Union battery. Doubleday's lead regiment, the 76th New York, is hit hard and begins to panic. Its commander, Colonel William Wainwright, succeeds in calming his jittery troops. General Gibbon quickly orders his entire 4th Brigade off the road and north into the cover of the trees on the Brawner Farm, followed by Doubleday's entire 2nd Brigade. At this moment, Gibbon can only assume that this is merely a harassing fire from a few light horse artillery batteries. He has no idea that Jackson's entire force of almost 24,000 men lies just beyond the trees within a mile of his position. Doubleday finds Gibbon, and the 2 brigadiers agree that since Jackson's main force is reported to be at Centreville, the artillery to their front must be that of Stuart's horse artillery. Gibbon quickly assents to Doubleday's suggestion that an attack on the closest enemy battery is called for. Those members of the Black Hat Brigade who have yet to experience combat are about to receive their baptism of fire. Gibbon orders Colonel Edgar O'Connor, commanding the 2nd Wisconsin, to advance his regiment and capture one of Stuart's guns. The 2nd Wisconsin, known as a ragged-ass 2nd because of the condition of their trousers, numbers 430 officers and men. Colonel O'Connor had lost his voice that day and has to whisper to his adjutant to convey the orders to advance. Just after 6:30 p.m., the Badgers moved through the Brawner Woods onto open ground and formed into line of battle, pushing out skirmishers and finally halting in a Broom's Edge field near the southern end of the ridge, 300 yards from the Brawner Farm. To the front and left lay a log farmhouse, a barn, several outbuildings, and a peach and apple orchard. Suddenly, a long line of Confederate infantry columns emerged from the woods to the right and a bit farther up the hill. 5 scarlet battle flags waving proudly, one for each Virginia regiment marching forward. It is the storied Stonewall Brigade, the flower of the Confederate Army, called Jackson's Foot Cavalry because of the incredible distances they can travel in mere days. They are arguably among the best soldiers in Lee's army. Veterans of every major battle fought in the Eastern Theater. Jackson's old Virginia Brigade has suffered heavy losses in the Shenandoah Valley Campaign in the 7 Days battles, cutting their numbers from 2,000 to 800. But this 800, commanded by Colonel William S. Baylor, are tough, seasoned, hard fighters and outnumber Gibbon's Badgers by almost 2 to 1. Soon, Gibbon's troops find themselves under musket fire from the advancing Confederates. Although the sight of Jackson's veterans send a ripple of awe through Gibbon's line, the Wisconsin men aren't deterred and continue moving up the hill towards the enemy. Other than a few wild volleys that endangers the Union skirmishers more than it does the Confederates, the 430 men of the 2nd Wisconsin hold their fire. As the two groups close to musket range, one young Union soldier noted that his comrades held their pieces with a tighter grasp and began to murmur quietly, "Come on, God damn you." At less than 100 yards, the 2nd Wisconsin unleashes a tremendous musket volley, what a Confederate officer remembered as a most terrific and deadly fire. The Virginians stagger and come to a halt in the face of the Union volley. The Confederate column pushes forward to an old fence 80 yards from the blue line, halts and open fires themselves, letting loose a series of concentrated volleys accompanied by the fearsome rebel yell.
Within 1 minute, all was enveloped in smoke, and a sheet of flame seemed to go out from each side to the other along the whole length of the line.
For 20 minutes, the two battle lines blaze away as casualties begin to mount. Colonel O'Connor is knocked from his horse by musket fire and dies within the hour, leaving Lieutenant Colonel Lucius Fairchild to assume command of the regiment. Soon the Confederate numbers begin to tell as the 4th Virginia gains defenses and outbuildings around the Brawner home, threatening to overlap the Badgers' left flank. Gibbon orders Colonel Solomon Meredith's 19th Indiana, 423 men strong, to move up on the Badgers' flank east of the Brawner home. As the inexperienced Hoosiers move into position, they come under a murderous volley fire from the 4th Virginia. Somehow, they steady themselves to begin to fire back as rapidly as the more experienced Wisconsin men next to them. With the initial advance by the Stonewall Brigade stalled and the daylight beginning to fade, Jackson attempts to bring additional units into the fray. The frustrated general finds 3 regiments from Brigadier General Alexander R. Lawton's brigade. Ignoring the chain of command, the impatient Jackson personally leads some 900 Georgia troops across 400 yards of open ground into a blaze of fire from Federal muskets. They take up positions on Baylor's left, overlapping the 2nd Wisconsin's right flank, which they target with mass volleys. Responding to Lawton's advance, Gibbon hurries forward Colonel William Robinson's 7th Wisconsin, and the men of the 440-strong regiment clear the Brawner woods and align themselves on the Union right, signing Lawton's Confederates less than 100 yards to their front. The two lines stand and blast away at one another, with casualties mounted on both sides. Union wounded begin to steadily stream down the hillside toward field hospitals south of the turnpike. As it becomes darker, the rifle fire merges into what Gibbon later describes as a long and continuous roll. In his ambulance south of the pike, Brigadier General King wrote that, as the dim twilight deepened, night and hell seemed to come down together. As the brutal fighting continues, Jackson becomes uncharacteristically desperate. The Union troops are fighting with what he describes later as obstinate determination. And Jackson is not a man given to hyperbole. He tries to get more men into the line to break the Union front once and for all. He dispatches the 1,200 men from Brigadier General Isaac R. Trimble's brigade to form up on the Stonewall Brigade's left, hoping to envelop Gibbon's line and turn the Union flank. However, as Trimble's men approach their place in the Confederate line, they discover that Gibbon is ahead of Jackson. Gibbon had sent his brigade's last regiment, Colonel Lysander Cutler's 6th Wisconsin, forward into a dry stream bed, lengthening the Union line to the right. As Cutler's green troops move up the slope, they can clearly see, even as darkness approaches, their 2nd and 7th Wisconsin comrades on higher ground to the left. They are, as a Union survivor later remembers, seemingly under the concentrated fire of at least 6 times their own numbers. As Cutler's men fall into line, he orders them to halt, dress their ranks, and open fire. A sheet of flame from 500 muskets erupts. At a range of only 75 yards, the Union volley brings the Southerners to a complete and utterly stunned halt. One Union survivor from the 6th Wisconsin recalled,
"Every gun cracked at once, and the line in front, which had faced us as the command ready, melted away, and instead of the heavy line of battle that was there before our volley, they presented the appearance of a skirmish line."
Trimble's troops are veterans and doggedly continue their advance, seeking cover behind an old snake rail fence, and are soon firing back. For 90 minutes, the two lines exchange murderous volleys as the light grows dimmer and dimmer. When he discovers a 250-yard gap in this line between the 7th Wisconsin's right and the left of the 6th, Gibbon appeals to Hatch, Doubleday, and Patrick for help. Tied down under heavy Confederate artillery fire, Hatch manages to send one regiment, the 30th New York, to support Gibbon's artillery units. Patrick prefers to hold in place. As far as he is concerned, Gibbon, the son of a slaveholder from North Carolina, with 3 brothers, 2 brother-in-laws, and a cousin serving the Confederacy, has gotten himself into the scrap and he would have to get himself out of it. Brigadier General Doubleday unilaterally orders forward the 450-man 76th New York led by Colonel Wainwright and the 531 men of the 56th Pennsylvania under Colonel Sullivan A. Meredith to aid Gibbon. Almost 1,000 fresh troops move into the gap, stiffening Gibbon's battered line as well as completing it. The Union line now stretches for nearly half a mile, with 6 regiments, 2,781 men engaged. On the other side, Jackson has committed 3 brigades against Gibbon, and Doubleday now has more than 3,000 men engaged. Although he has over 20,000 troops in the area, he's having difficulty bringing more troops to bear. Darkness is less than an hour away. On the Union left, the 19th Indiana and 2nd Wisconsin continues the battle of the Stonewall Brigade. In the smoke and dust on the Union right, the 6th Wisconsin and Trimble's men fire blindly at each other's muzzle flashes, the lines remaining locked in pitched battle. Refusing to accept his stalemate, at 7:15 p.m. Jackson orders Brigadier General William B. Tolfer to dispatch a fresh brigade against the 19th Indiana on the Union left. Tolfer's nearest uncommitted brigade, that of his uncle Colonel Alexander G. Tolfer, is more than a quarter mile away and will take some time to arrive. Jackson orders a frontal assault by the combined forces of Lawton and Trimble to advance and crush all resistance. Only one unit, Trimble's brigade, is able to respond immediately. Due to a deadly lapse in communications that seemingly plagues the Confederates for the entire day, only 2 of Trimble's 4 regiments get the order to advance, and they go forward together, unsupported with their flanks hanging in the air. The twin regiments of Trimble's brigade, the 21st Georgia and 21st North Carolina, receive a devastating volley from the 56th Pennsylvania to their front, while the 6th Wisconsin pours musket fire into the Confederate left. Within seconds, the attacking line seems to melt into the ground, withered by the storm of lead loosened upon it. One 6th Wisconsin officer remembered,
"Human nature could not stand such a terrible wasting fire. It literally mowed out great gaps in the line."
As Trimble's assault grinds to a complete halt, Jackson rides to Lawton, whose brigade of Georgians is now near the center of the Confederate line, and orders him forward. Once again, only 2 regiments, the 26th and 38th Georgia, respond, and they meet a fate similar to Trimble's, as the 7th Wisconsin and 76th New York wheel from their positions to deliver a crushing volley into the southern flank. Our fire perfectly annihilated the rebels, one soldier of the 7th Wisconsin reported. A 76th New Yorker added,
"No rebel of that column who escaped death will ever forget that volley. It seemed like one gun."
The 26th Georgia suffers 72% casualties in the assault, leaving their colors on the field. The survivors fall back to their original positions. Nothing comes of the Confederate advance, but both sides battle on, neither advancing nor retreating. The final act in the bloody drama at Brawner Farm comes on the Federal left, where Gibbon, realizing the tactical importance of the 19th Indiana's position, has stationed himself for the duration of the fighting. Confederate artilleryman Captain John Pelham of the Stuart Horse Artillery hurries 3 rifle guns from the rear and manages to get 2 of them unlimbered within 100 yards of the 19th Indiana's line. Seeing this, Colonel Meredith, known as Long Saw to his troops for 6 foot 7 inch height, moves 2 companies to his left and forward, where their fire forces Captain Pelham to move his guns back. Colonel Meredith himself is severely wounded when his horse is shot and falls on top of him. Behind Pelham comes 3 of the 5 regiments of A.G. Tolfer's brigade, some 600 Virginians and Georgians, the last of Jackson's immediate reinforcements in that sector. The fresh troops halt in the yard of the now riddled Brawner home and rake the left of the Union line as almost full darkness shrouds the field. The most terrific musketry fire I have ever listened to rolled along those 2 lines of battle, Gibbon later recalled, neither side yielding a foot. At last, after Pelham's guns find the range from their new position, adding to the rain of musket fire, Gibbon orders the 19th Indiana to conduct a fighting retreat. After almost 2 hours of continuous close-range fighting and heavy losses on both sides, darkness and fatigue finally slows the firing and the fighting grinds to a halt sometime after 8 p.m. The setting of the sun and the pervasive confusion across the battlefield prevents Stonewall Jackson from employing the additional brigades which had finally moved forward from Stony Ridge. Confederate command incapacity increases when Major General Ewell falls with a serious wound while trying to lead an assault around the Union right flank. 3 Northern bullets find Brigadier General William B. Talford, disabling him as well as thus crippling the command of Jackson's division. When it is over, both sides have suffered heavily. 1 of every 3 men to enter the fight is either killed or wounded, but neither side can claim a tactical victory. Jackson has not communicated well with his division commanders, resulting in piecemeal frontal attacks that were met by determined opposition from 6 Union regiments. Jackson commands 14 brigades but is able to get only 3 seriously engaged, fielding 2 understrength brigades, Baylors and Trimbles, and regiments of 2 other brigades commanded by Lawton and A.G. Talford. After Talford's 600 men enter the fray, the total strength of the Confederate assault force outnumbered the Union's 6 regiments by about 800 men. Jackson has now lost 2 of his 3 division commanders, and Major General A.P. Hill's reinforcements arrived too late to take part. As the field hospitals quickly fill and surgeons begin their grim work, the dreadful losses on both sides become apparent. The first units to enter the fray have suffered terribly. The 2nd Wisconsin went into battle with 430 men and now counts 276 casualties, including 83 men killed outright. While the Stonewall Brigade has suffered 300 casualties, almost 40% of its strength. The 19th Indiana suffered heavy losses as well, around 60%, with 260 casualties out of 423 men. Lawson's brigade lost more than 300 men killed, wounded, and missing, while a little more than an hour of fighting. Trimble's brigade suffered some 350 casualties, almost a third of its strength. Trimble's 21st Georgia has lost 184 men out of 242, the 2nd worst Confederate regimental loss in the entire war, second to only the 1st Texas at the Battle of Antietam less than a month later. As a whole, Gibbon's Black Hat Brigade has lost almost 40% of its strength, 725 casualties out of 1,900 troops engaged. Doubleday's 2 regiments suffered another 425 casualties, bringing the federal total to 1,150. Jackson's force of 3,500 suffers 1,100 casualties. Brigadier General King reassumes command at about 11 p.m., and after conferring with his brigade commanders, he decides to march his battered division to Manassas Junction, 8 miles away. Rickett's 2nd Division joins him on the road, retreating from Thoroughfare Gap after the brief encounter with Longstreet's right wing as the latter is making its way to the battlefield. The first day of the 2nd Battle of Bull Run, or Battle of Second Manassas at the Brawner Farm, has ended in a bloody tactical draw. But if the tactical outcome of the August 28th Brawner Farm battle leaves something to be desired, Jackson cannot have better achieved his strategic objective. His attack on the evening of August 28th is the military equivalent of waving a red flag under John Pope's nose, and the bullish Pope reacts just as Stonewall has hoped. Rather than safely removing his army to the far side of Bull Run, the Union commander calls for a concentration against Jackson at Groveton. He wrongly concludes that Gibbon's fight at the Brawner Farm has arrested Jackson's retreat from Centreville and thus imagines another opportunity to demolish the Valley Magician. Pope issues a spate of orders on the night of the 28th aimed at surrounding Jackson and attacking him in the morning. The next day, Friday, August 29th, will see more bitter fighting ahead for both sides as Jackson struggles to hold his position while waiting for Longstreet's arrival on the field. During the night, General Jackson begins making his preparations for the next day's fighting.